What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And last night I saw Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Yes, this film has finally arrived after over a year of anticipation. And I think it's really freaking good and a lot of fun. I might as well say it right now. This film in no way surpasses Fallout. That film has set an extraordinarily high bar, but this is still on the higher end of Mission Impossible films. Right now, I'm debating whether it or Ghost Protocol is the better movie. This review is going to be kind of difficult because some of the things I like about this film and many of the things I dislike about it are spoilers. And since it's only been out for a couple days, I don't want to ruin the experience for any of you. So, hopefully you'll be able to follow along well enough, because I'm going to have to be extremely vague about certain things. This film excellently carries over Ethan Hunt's defining character trait, his unwillingness to let other people die. And that's brought to its extreme here, as he's put up against an enemy which can predict his every move. The main antagonist of this film isn't so much a person as much as it is a force, an all-seeing entity, if you will. Not only is that a very refreshing concept for this franchise where most of the villains are extremists who want to blow something up to incite nuclear war, but it also forces Ethan to confront the fact that this time around, he can't actually save everyone. This film has actual stakes. In my recent review of Fallout, I criticized this franchise for not taking enough risks. And although my point still kind of stands, I am eating my words right now. Towards the end of the second act, shit gets real, and I literally said out loud, I don't believe they have the guts to do that. But then they did it, which threw me for a loop, and the rest of the film was all the more intense because of it. And I know everyone has been saying this, but I was pleasantly surprised by many of the new additions to the cast. Hayley Atwell is great here. As a matter of fact, this might be her best performance. Her character, while being irritating at first, grew on me over the course of the film. She's intentionally a frustrating character to start out with, but the arc she goes through was quite effective. Pom Klementieff was also a standout. For a good chunk of the film, she seems like your standard crazy henchman who's just kind of a psychopath for the sake of it, but she ended up being much more than that. The movie feels like a mix of the classic Mission Impossible self-aware goofiness, more akin to Ghost Protocol, and the constant building dread of Fallout. Some moments were hilariously cheesy, but that didn't bug me. They struck the perfect balance of those two different tones. The pacing also wasn't nearly as smooth as Fallout. There are some fairly egregious exposition dumps, but the individual action scenes continually find ways to increase the tension and stakes. The train sequence, which has been heavily marketed in the trailers, is a masterclass in suspense. There are a lot of subtle callbacks to the original Mission Impossible film as well, from the return of characters like Agent Kittredge or familiar settings like the third act taking place on a train, even down to Christopher McQuarrie framing certain scenes using Dutch angles, very clearly paying homage to Brian De Palma's directorial style. And Lorne Balfe once again kills it with his score. I didn't like this one quite as much as his score for Fallout, but that's just because I'm more used to it. This one will undoubtedly grow on me over time as I listen to it more. What I loved most about his work here is how he was able to twist certain themes we are familiar with to create something new. For example, as previously stated, towards the end of the second act, shit starts to get real, and to communicate that to us, Balfe begins by playing the classic Mission Impossible theme, but rather than transitioning into the chord progression we're used to, it starts descending, telling us that something real bad is about to go down here. Likewise, the theme for Haley Atwell's character is just the plot motif, but slowed down and with some of the notes changed around, creating a completely different sound. Now, of course, the main antagonistic entity in this film needs a face to represent it, and that face comes in the form of Gabriel, a character who, as a pure physical force, is a slight improvement over Henry Cavill from the previous film, who never really got the chance to prove himself as a legitimate threat. This character shows on more than one occasion that he should be feared. He's just a straight-up evil dude. There's nothing deeper to him than that, and there didn't need to be. Which is where the problem lies, in the fact that they tried to unnecessarily tie him into Ethan Hunt's backstory in a way that feels clunky and forced. If they wanted us to buy into the idea that these guys have a history which goes way back, then it didn't come across in the film, because these actors have little to no chemistry on screen. He would have worked better as a Joker-esque, some men just want to watch the world burn type of villain. But I guess every movie now has to have an antagonist with an emotional connection to the protagonist. But in this case, it just wasn't convincing at all. And as per usual with the MI movies, there are several different parties after the same MacGuffin as our heroes. And in this film, there are these two guys chasing after Ethan Hunt, and every time it cut back to them, I was just like, why are you here? They seem incredibly incompetent and fail at every turn, until the third act, where it's kind of revealed what their purpose was, but it's still unclear why they were there. It felt like those characters could have been completely removed from the story and it wouldn't have changed anything. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and see if those characters play a more significant role in the next film. This is where it gets kind of difficult not to spoil things. But around the beginning of the third act, a certain character says they are doing something, which I assumed was a setup for something to happen later on, considering what they had established this antagonistic force as being capable of. But nothing happens, and I was left kind of confused. The way they wrote this villain is in a way that it can do anything at any point, but sometimes it chooses not to, which I guess could explain this, but in the context of the film, it felt like a major plot hole. And it is worth mentioning that similar to Fallout, there were some moments of noticeable CGI in this film, never to a point where it pulled me out of the experience, but I could tell when it was being used. For example, I knew going into the film that they had built a ramp for Tom Cruise to jump off of on his motorcycle, so while watching the film, I could tell the cliff he was riding on was at least partially CGI, but it never broke my immersion in something like the train scene. The CGI is used so sparingly that it looks a hell of a lot better than 95% of blockbusters being released at the moment, but it was still noticeable to me. One last thing that bugged me in this movie is how they've seemingly ignored many of the open plot threads from the previous films, mainly Solomon Lane and the Apostles. Ethan's mission since the end of Ghost Protocol was to hunt down and stop the Syndicate, and then the Apostles. Just because they captured Lane and killed John Lark doesn't mean that members of that organization aren't still out there. They also did everything in their power to ensure that Lane was left alive at the end of the previous film, So I assumed that he would serve a greater purpose in the future installments of the series. But his name isn't even mentioned once here, and I don't see how they can tie him into the narrative of Part 2. It just feels like they've gotten so caught up in this grand plot about this new villainous force that they've forgotten about some of the things they left hanging at the end of Fallout. But that's about all I have to say without spoiling Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I may or may not make a ranking video of the Mission Impossible movies. I know I usually do that at the end of a series like this, but I kind of want to wait until Part 2 releases so I can accurately judge this film. But you guys let me know if you'd like to see that, because I will gladly make that video if it's something you guys are interested in seeing. And let me know what your thoughts are on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 if you've seen it. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Are you hyped for Part 2 next summer? Just whatever your thoughts are. Please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.